Sometimes what we call guilt isn't guilt at all. It's something that disguised itself as guilt just to survive inside us. And when it finally comes to the surface, nothing is ever the same again. I'm going to tell you the story of Violet Hargrove and Sloane Beaumont, two women who loved each other 11 years ago, two women who lost each other without saying goodbye, and two women that fate forced back together in the worst place imaginable. Violet returned to Savannah, Georgia, to catalog the belongings of an inherited house, an old Victorian full of dust and secrets, and buried among forgotten boxes and yellowed papers. She found a signature she would recognize with her eyes closed. Sloane's signature, next to a single line written in fading blue ink. "Forgive me for not being braver." The next day, Sloane appeared at her door. Not as the woman Violet remembered, but as the attorney assigned to the estate. And when their eyes met in that dark hallway, the air stopped moving. Because that house holds something no one ever told them. A mural buried beneath layers of whitewash. Letters that were more than simple confessions. And a bond between their families that reaches back long before either of them was born. This is not just a story about a reunion. It's a story about buried love, inherited guilt, and a secret that spent decades waiting for the right people to bring it into the light. Stay with me until the end to hear this story. See you soon.
There is a kind of guilt that doesn't need witnesses. It settles into your chest like a wet stone, without making a sound, without asking permission. Violet knew it well. She had carried it for 11 years, ever since the night she closed a door, knowing she never should have opened it in the first place. Now, kneeling on the hardwood floor of a house that smelled of dust and rotting magnolias, her hands were trembling. Not from the chill of a December morning in Savannah, not from the cobwebs that clung to her fingers. They were trembling because between yellowed envelopes and faded utility bills from decades past, she had just found a signature she would recognize with her eyes closed. A signature that had no business being there. A signature that belonged to the only person Violet had sworn to forget. And beneath that signature, a single line written in blue ink that time had nearly washed away. "Forgive me for not being braver." Violet dropped the paper as though it burned. She stayed frozen, kneeling on the worn pine boards, her heart hammering against her ribs. Outside, a mockingbird sang from the live oak in the front yard, and somewhere down the block, a dog barked lazily. But inside that house, everything had stopped, as if the air itself knew that something had just cracked open. Subscribe now. YouTube prioritizes subscribers, and those who aren't subscribed miss future stories. Violet Hargrove was 34 years old, with careful hands trained to restore what others had given up on, and a life built on one simple principle: never look back. She had arrived in Savannah 3 days earlier from Asheville, North Carolina, where she had spent 6 years working as an independent art restorer in a small studio she shared with a ceramicist and a woodworker. Her life was orderly, her schedule predictable, her emotions carefully sealed, like the hairline cracks in an antique canvas that you close with patience and resin. The phone call had come on a Tuesday afternoon while Violet was cleaning oxidized varnish from an 18th century altarpiece panel. An estate attorney from Savannah, with a nasal voice and sentences that were far too formal, informed her that Miss Genevieve Ashford, her maternal grandmother's older sister, had passed away 2 months prior, and that among the provisions of her will was a house in the historic district. Not for Violet directly, but for the Hargrove family, on the condition that someone with proper expertise catalog the objects of artistic value before any legal decisions could be made. The attorney had identified Violet as the only family member qualified for the task. Nobody else wanted to do it. Nobody else wanted to set foot in that house. Violet accepted because she needed the money. That was what she told herself. That was what she repeated to Claire,
her studio partner, while packing a small suitcase. But there was something else, something she didn't dare name. A dark curiosity, the kind you feel when you know that opening a door might lead you straight to the thing you've been running from. Miss Genevieve's house stood on one of Savannah's most storied squares, a few blocks south of Forsyth Park. It was a 3-story Victorian with a wraparound porch, its clapboard siding painted in a shade of cream that had once been elegant and now peeled like sunburned skin. The wrought iron gate at the front groaned when Violet pushed it open, and she felt the world split in two. The noise of the street, with its tour trolleys and joggers and tourists photographing the Spanish moss that dripped from the oaks like gray curtains, and the thick silence of the interior, where time seemed to have stopped somewhere between the 1980s and oblivion. The side garden was overtaken by wisteria that had grown wild, climbing the porch columns and cascading over a stone birdbath filled with dead leaves. There were cracked terracotta pots in the corners, a rusted bicycle leaning against the carriage house wall, and a sweet, sickly smell that Violet identified as rotting fruit. Probably the figs from the tree whose branches hung over the neighbor's fence. Violet walked through the house with the notebook she always carried. She counted 7 rooms, 3 of them locked. The kitchen had original hand-painted tiles that had once been beautiful and were now cracked and grimy. The dining room held a long mahogany table, covered with an embroidered cloth that humidity had stained an irreversible shade of brown. There were paintings on the walls, most of them worthless reproductions, but 2 caught her attention. A small oil of the Savannah River marshes at sunset that appeared to be original, and a charcoal portrait of a young woman Violet didn't recognize, whose expression, somewhere between defiant and melancholy, sent a chill down her spine she couldn't explain. It was on the 3rd day that she found the boxes. They were stacked in what appeared to have been a study at the back of the hallway that led to the rear garden. A dozen cardboard boxes, some reinforced with yellowed packing tape, others already open with their contents partially exposed. Papers, photographs, ledgers, newspaper clippings. Dust floated in the beams of light that entered through a high window, and the morning heat was beginning to make the room smell of old paper and mothballs. Violet began working methodically, as she always did. She sorted documents by type. Photographs in one pile, correspondence in another, legal documents in a third. She wore white cotton gloves, the same ones she used to handle fragile pieces in her studio. And it was like that, with her hands protected, but her heart completely exposed, that she opened a large manila envelope and found a bundle of letters tied with a green silk ribbon. The first letter was dated 2014. The handwriting was firm, elegant, slanting slightly to the right. Violet read it with a mix of professional curiosity and emotional distance. It was a thank you note. Someone was thanking Miss Genevieve for her hospitality during those difficult weeks. The tone was formal, but warm. There was no full name at the end, only an initial. S. Violet moved to the second letter, then the third. As she progressed, the tone shifted. The letters became more intimate, more urgent. They spoke of decisions made under pressure, of families that didn't understand, of a love that couldn't exist out loud. Violet felt the heat of the room intensify. She pulled off the cardigan she wore over her cotton blouse. She kept reading. The 7th letter stopped her cold. It wasn't the content. It was the signature. Sloane Beaumont, complete. No abbreviations, no initials, no possibility of error. Violet closed her eyes. The name struck her memory like a wave crashing against rocks without warning. Sloane. The woman who 11 years earlier, on an August night on the rooftop of a building in downtown Savannah, during a gallery opening neither of them should have attended, had taken her hand with a naturalness Violet never forgot. The woman with whom she had shared 3 months that felt like an entire universe. The woman she had left without explanation, without goodbye, without a single word to justify her disappearance. And now her name was here, in a letter addressed to Violet's great-aunt, speaking of a love that couldn't exist out loud. Violet opened her eyes and reread the signature, then reread the letter, then the one before, and the one before that. And then she understood something that froze her blood. Sloane hadn't written to Miss Genevieve as a casual acquaintance. She had written as someone who trusted her, someone who sought her counsel, someone who spoke to her about a woman who had devastated her by leaving without explanation. The woman she described was Violet. She stood up too quickly. Her head spun. She leaned against the doorframe and breathed deeply, swallowing hot air that tasted of dust. Outside, a street musician had begun playing "Georgia on My Mind" on a saxophone with that slow, mournful cadence that only Savannah street musicians possess. And the sound drifted through the window like a knife wrapped in velvet. Miss Genevieve had known. She had known all this time. She had received Sloane's letters, had kept everyone, and never, in the handful of family gatherings Violet had attended over the years, had she said a single word about it. Not a glance. Not a hint. Nothing. Why? What kind of secret was this house keeping? What connected Sloane to Miss Genevieve beyond what the letters said? Violet pulled her phone from her jeans pocket. She had a missed call from the estate attorney's number. She returned it with trembling fingers. Mr. Pemberton answered on the third ring with his bureaucratic voice. "Mr. Pemberton, it's Violet Hargrove. I saw that you called." "Miss Hargrove, good that you're returning my call." Pemberton replied in a tone that sounded rehearsed. "I wanted to inform you that the attorney representing the secondary party of the will is arriving tomorrow to review the terms of the estate with you. There are certain conditions that must be met before we proceed with the formal cataloging." "Secondary party?" Violet asked. "You didn't mention anything about that before." "These are details that are disclosed in the appropriate phases of the process, Miss Hargrove. That's how Miss Ashford arranged it." Violet clenched her jaw. She hated legal evasions. "Who is the attorney?" There was a pause. One of those pauses that lasts only a second but carries the weight of something the other person doesn't want to say. "Her name is Sloane Beaumont. She works at a firm on Broughton Street." "Do you know her?" Violet didn't answer immediately. She stood in the middle of the dark hallway, the light from the garden falling on her back, and the shadow of the house covering her face. "No," she lied. "I don't know her." She hung up before the attorney could add anything else. She sat on the edge of the dry bird bath in the side garden. The wisteria brushed against her hair. The Savannah winter sun, that sun that is bright but carries no warmth, hit the back of her neck, and Violet thought about what she always thought about when Sloane's name surfaced in her mind, which was more often than she would ever admit, that what she did was wrong, that leaving was an act of cowardice disguised as protection, that calling it guilt was easier than calling it what it really was. But she wasn't ready to give it the other name. Not yet. Maybe not ever. That night, Violet couldn't sleep. She stayed in the bedroom she had chosen as the least deteriorated, a room with a bay window overlooking the garden and a single bed with a mattress that smelled of damp, despite the clean sheets she had bought at a shop on Broughton Street that same afternoon. She listened to the sounds of the house as though they were a language, the pipes groaning, the branches of the oak tree scraping the roof, the neighbor's cat yowling from some nearby fence. She thought about the letters, about Sloane's handwriting, about how she described what she had felt with a precision Violet had never been able to articulate. Sloane wrote about the shame of wanting someone with an intensity that society didn't approve of. She wrote about her mother, a woman from Charleston, devout Baptist, who once said at the family dinner table that those things were a sickness of the modern world. She wrote about her decision to study law as a way of building herself armor. And she wrote about Violet, though she never named her, as the woman who restored broken things but didn't know how to restore herself. That line hurt. It hurt because it was true. At 3 a.m, Violet got up, went to the kitchen, boiled water in a kettle she found in the cupboard, and made herself chamomile tea with the tea bag she had brought from Asheville. She sat in the garden, beneath stars barely visible through the city's ambient glow, and made a decision that cost her more than any other in the last 11 years. Not to run. Not this time. When the first ray of sunlight filtered through the tops of the live oaks and the morning doves began cooing on the porch railing, Violet was already dressed, her hair pulled back in a low bun, the notebook in her hand, and the cotton gloves in her pocket. She had moved the boxes from the study and lined them up in the dining room, on the long mahogany table. She had separated Sloane's letters from the rest of the correspondence and placed them in a drawer of the study desk. She didn't hide them. She just put them where they wouldn't be in plain sight. At 10 a.m, there was a knock at the door. Not the doorbell, which was broken, but a firm rapping on the front door. 3 sharp knocks, evenly spaced, with the assurance of someone accustomed to knocking on difficult doors. Violet walked down the hallway. Every step felt like she was carrying lead in her shoes. She placed her hand on the doorknob. She breathed and opened. The woman standing on the other side was not the Sloane Violet remembered, and at the same time, she was exactly her. Sloane Beaumont was 35 years old and had a presence that occupied more space than her body required. She was slender, of average height, with dark hair cut above the shoulders in a way that framed her angular face and accentuated her high cheekbones. She wore a charcoal blazer, an ivory silk blouse, and low-heeled shoes that made a firm sound against the porch boards. In one hand, she carried a leather briefcase, and in the other, a cup of coffee from the cafe Violet recognized as the one on the corner of Bull Street. Her eyes were the same, dark, intelligent, with that quality of looking as though they could read your thoughts, but chose not to say so. They looked at each other. It wasn't a second. It wasn't an instant. It was one of those pauses that contain an entire compressed history, like a file that weighs too much and takes too long to open. Sloane spoke first. "Violet Hargrove," she said, and her voice was firm, professional, without a single tremor. But her eyes lingered one instant too long on Violet's before dropping to the briefcase. "I'm the attorney assigned to the secondary provisions of Genevieve Ashford's estate. Mr. Pemberton should have informed you of my visit." "He did," Violet replied, and she hated herself for how hoarse her own voice sounded. "Come in, please." She stepped aside. Sloane crossed the threshold with the confidence of someone entering a courtroom, not an old house in Savannah's historic district. But Violet noticed something a less observant person would have missed. When Sloane stepped into the garden and saw the wisteria, and the dry bird bath, and the cracked pots, her jaw tightened, just for a second. Then the professional mask slid back into place. "Beautiful house," Sloane said without looking at Violet. "Good bones. The decay is cosmetic. Nothing that can't be repaired." "I hope so," Violet replied. "That's what I do. Repair things." Sloane looked at her then, and in that look, there was something that wasn't in the professional script. Something quick, sharp, like the flash of a blade catching the light. "Some things," Sloane said with a precision that made the words cut through the air, "don't get repaired. They get accepted as they are." Violet didn't respond. She simply closed the front door behind them, and the sound of the heavy wood against the frame rang out like the period at the end of a sentence neither of them had finished saying. They sat in the dining room, facing each other, with the mahogany table between them like a trench. Sloane opened her briefcase with precise movements, pulled out a folder of documents, and placed it on the stained tablecloth without making any comment about its condition.
Violet watched her with the attention of someone examining a piece that might be authentic or a perfect forgery. Genevieve Ashford's will has two principal provisions, Sloane began, and her voice had adopted the neutral, efficient tone attorneys use when they want the law to speak for them. The first, which you already know about, establishes that the house and its contents pass to the Hargrove family, on the condition that an inventory of objects with artistic value is completed. That's what you're here doing. And the second? Violet asked. Sloane paused, took a sip of her coffee, set it on the table carefully, on a napkin she pulled from her briefcase, as though protecting that old tablecloth made any sense. The second provision establishes that there is an additional beneficiary, a person outside the Hargrove family who is entitled to certain specific objects in the house, provided her personal connection to the deceased can be demonstrated. Who? Violet felt something tighten in her stomach. Sloane raised her eyes from the documents. Her gaze met Violet's with a frankness that ached. Me, she said. I'm the additional beneficiary. The silence that followed was so dense that Violet could hear the ticking of a grandfather clock she hadn't even known was working. It stood somewhere in the hallway, and its rhythmic sound filled the pause like a metronome marking the beat of something about to collapse. You? Violet repeated, and there was something in her voice that wasn't surprise. It was fear. You knew Miss Genevieve? I knew her years ago, Sloane replied, and for the first time her professional mask cracked. Just slightly. A change in her breathing, a blink that lasted longer than normal. She was important to me at a time when I had no one else. When? Violet asked, though she already knew the answer. 11 years ago, Sloane said. After someone walked out of my life without saying goodbye. Miss Genevieve found me, or I found her. It doesn't matter how. What matters is that this house was my refuge when I had none. The accusation wasn't in the words. It was in the space between them. In the way Sloane said someone instead of you. In how she avoided eye contact just as the sentence landed. Violet swallowed hard. She would have liked to have had an answer prepared. A noble explanation. A reason that justified leaving on that August dawn, while Sloane slept in the apartment they shared near Forsyth Park, with the windows open and the hum of the cicadas like a lullaby. But she had nothing. Only the raw, inelegant truth. She was afraid. Afraid of what she felt, of what it meant, of what it would cost. Sloane, she began. We're here to work. Sloane cut in with a firmness that brooked no negotiation. The will requires both parties to collaborate in identifying the objects that correspond to each beneficiary. I suggest we start today. I'm available Monday through Thursday, 9 to 2. Does that work for you? Violet nodded. Not because she agreed, but because she recognized the defense mechanism. She recognized it because it was the same one she had used for 11 years. Turn everything into a task, a schedule, a checklist. Keep distance through logistics. That works, Violet said. Sloane pulled a second document from the folder. I need you to sign here. It's a confidentiality agreement regarding the contents of the will. Standard in these cases. Violet took the pen Sloane offered. Their fingers brushed. It was a minimal involuntary contact, lasting less than a second. But Violet felt the skin on the back of her hand electrify, and she saw, with a clarity that infuriated her, that Sloane pulled her hand away too quickly. She signed without reading, then regretted not having read it. But it was done. The first hours of work were an exercise in surgical courtesy. Sloane walked through the house with Violet, noting on a tablet the objects Miss Genevieve had specified in an appendix to the will. There was a list. It wasn't long,
but it was specific. A set of antique Wedgwood teacups, a hand-painted folding screen in one of the locked rooms, 3 boxes of first edition books, and one item that Sloane read aloud with a nearly imperceptible hesitation. The mural in the rear garden, in its entirety, including the wall that supports it. She read, "Should said mural be found hidden or deteriorated, its restoration is requested before any transfer." Violet frowned. Mural. I didn't see any mural in the back garden. There's just a brick wall covered in ivy. Well, that's what the will says, Sloane replied. And if Miss Genevieve included it, it's because it exists. They went to the rear garden. It was smaller than the side garden, with a stone utility sink, a rusted clothesline, and indeed, a long wall covered in ivy and climbing vines so dense that you could barely see the construction material underneath. Violet approached and began pulling the leaves aside with her hands. Beneath the vegetation, under layers of dirt and accumulated grime, her fingers found something that was neither brick nor mortar. It was a smooth surface, painted. "There's something here," Violet murmured, and her voice changed. It was no longer the voice of the uncomfortable woman avoiding Sloane's gaze. It was the voice of the restorer, the professional who activated when she found something hidden beneath layers of time and neglect. Sloane moved closer. She stood beside her. Close. Closer than professional protocol required. And together, in silence, they began pulling away the ivy with their hands, revealing inch by inch a surface of faded but visible colors. Blues, reds, ochres, greens. A mural. Someone had painted a mural on that wall and then let it die beneath the vines. "Oh my God," Sloane whispered. It wasn't a religious expression. It was pure astonishment. The fragment they had uncovered showed 2 hands intertwined, painted in a style that reminded Violet of the WPA muralists, but more intimate, more personal. It wasn't a political statement. It was a declaration of something far more dangerous. "Who painted this?" Sloane asked. "I don't know," Violet replied. "But whoever did it knew what they were doing. These pigments are high quality, the technique is skilled, and someone covered it up deliberately." They looked at each other. They were less than 2 feet apart. Both their hands were dirty with earth and leaves. And in that moment, with the afternoon sun falling on the rear garden of a house that held more secrets than either of them had imagined, Violet saw something in Sloane's eyes that she hadn't seen in 11 years. Vulnerability. It lasted an instant. Then Sloane straightened up, brushed off her hands, and became the attorney in the charcoal blazer again. "I'll need to inform the estate attorney about the condition of the mural," she said flatly. "And you'll need to assess it professionally. I'll need a restoration estimate." "I'll do it," Violet said. Sloane collected her briefcase from the dining room, checked the time on her watch, and walked toward the front door without looking back. Violet followed in silence. When Sloane placed her hand on the doorknob, she stopped. "Violet," she said without turning around. "Yes? Did you find anything else in the boxes? Anything that wasn't art objects?" Violet understood the question. She understood what was really being asked, and she had to decide, in that instant, between truth and caution. She chose a third option: ambiguity. "I found a lot of papers. I'm still sorting through them." Sloane nodded without turning around. She opened the door, and before stepping out, she said something Violet had to strain to hear, because she said it almost to herself. Genevieve was right. This house doesn't let people go easily. The door closed. Violet stood in the hallway, her hands dirty with earth, her heart racing, and a certainty that fell on her like a bucket of cold water. This was not going to be just work. This was not going to be just an estate. This was something Miss Genevieve had planned, something the letters only hinted at. something the hidden mural confirmed. Miss Genevieve had brought them together on purpose. That afternoon, after Sloane left, Violet returned to the study. She opened the drawer where she had placed the letters and found the last one in the bundle. It was dated just 2 years earlier. Sloane's handwriting had changed. It was more confident, more compact, as though the letters themselves had matured. But the content was devastating in its simplicity. "Dear Genevieve," it read, "you asked me if I've forgotten her. I'll answer with the truth I tell only you. No, I have not forgotten her. Some days I try. Other days, I surrender. What hurts most isn't that she left. What hurts most is that she never told me why, and I was left with a guilt that was maybe never mine. Sometimes I think that what we call guilt is just another form of love that doesn't know where to go. Yours, Sloane." Violet read that last line 3 times. What we call guilt is just another form of love that doesn't know where to go. She leaned back in the study chair. Outside, Savannah was settling into evening. The cafes along the squares were filling with couples and college students and artists selling sketches of the cathedral. The live oaks in Forsyth Park were catching the golden light that gave the city its look of a faded postcard. And somewhere on Broughton Street, Sloane was probably sitting in her office, reviewing case files, wearing the same mask of efficiency she used to keep from feeling. If this doesn't deserve a like, I don't know what does. The next morning, Sloane arrived punctual, 9 o'clock sharp. The same firm knocks on the front door, the same impeccable posture. But she brought something different, a bag of buttermilk biscuits from the bakery around the corner and 2 cups of coffee. "To work better," she said upon entering, setting the bag on the dining room table as though it were just another case file. Violet didn't know what to do with that gesture. It was too human for the professional scenario Sloane was working so hard to maintain. She took a biscuit and bit into it without saying anything. They worked all morning in the locked rooms. Sloane had the keys, provided by the estate attorney. The first room contained furniture covered with white sheets that looked like friendly ghosts from another era. There was a cedar wardrobe full of women's clothing from the 70s and 80s. Long dresses and embroidered blouses that smelled of cedar and lavender sachets. The second room was a library, small, with shelves from floor to ceiling, and a round window that let in a circle of light that fell exactly on a reading chair upholstered in green velvet. "I used to spend hours here," Sloane said suddenly, and her voice had a different tone, softer, closer to memory than to the present. Violet looked at her. Sloane was standing in front of the round window, the circle of light splitting her face in 2 halves, one illuminated, the other in shadow. "Genevieve would lend me books," Sloane continued. "She said literature was the only therapy that didn't require a prescription." "It sounds like you loved her very much," Violet said, choosing each word carefully. "I did," Sloane replied. "She was the first person who made me feel like nothing was broken in me." The sentence hung suspended between them. Violet knew she wasn't referring only to the loss of a friendship with an older woman. She was referring to something broader, deeper. She was referring to what Sloane had felt her whole life about being who she was and loving the way she loved. Violet wanted to say something. She wanted to say, "I felt broken too. That's why I left. Because I thought if I stayed, I'd break you too." But the words lodged in her throat like stones that don't fit through a narrow passage. Instead, she said, "Do you want to start evaluating the books? Some might have value." Sloane looked at her 1 second longer than necessary, then nodded. "Yes, let's start." They spent the morning inventorying. Violet examined each book with expert hands, checking editions, conditions, publisher's marks. Sloane noted everything on her tablet, comparing with the wills list. They worked in silence, and that silence was neither comfortable nor uncomfortable. It was taut, like the string of an instrument tuned too high that could play a beautiful note or snap. It was Sloane who found the photograph. It was tucked inside a book of poetry by Flannery O'Connor, used as a bookmark. A black and white photograph, small, with the scalloped edges of vintage prints. In it were two young women, standing in front of what appeared to be the same wall of the rear garden, but without the ivy. And behind them, the mural was clearly visible, complete, colorful, alive. The two women were smiling. One of them was unmistakably a young version of Miss Genevieve. The other, Violet didn't recognize, but something about her posture, the way her shoulder touched Genevieve's, the closeness of their bodies, told her they weren't just friends. Sloane stared at the photograph in silence for a long while. Then she turned it over. On the back, in handwriting that was neither Sloane's nor Genevieve's, someone had written, "Savannah, 1971, G and R, before Fear 1. R? Violet asked. I don't know, Sloane replied, but her expression said she was beginning to suspect something. They looked at each other over the open book. The round light from the window illuminated them both now, like a spotlight marking two actresses on a stage they hadn't chosen. There's something in this house they haven't told us, Violet said. Yes, Sloane replied. And I think Genevieve wanted us to discover it together. Violet closed the book carefully, leaving the photograph inside. She felt the weight of something beginning to take shape in her understanding, like an image slowly developing in a dark room. The connection between their families wasn't accidental. The mural wasn't decoration. The letters weren't simple confessions. Everything was connected, and the thread linking each piece had a color Violet knew all too well, the color of a love that had to hide to survive. When Sloane left that day, at 2 o'clock sharp as she had established, Violet stayed in the library. She took the photograph from the book and studied it with the magnifying loupe she always carried in her tool bag. She looked at young Genevieve's expression. She looked at the woman beside her. She looked at the mural behind them, still intact, with its vivid colors and two intertwined hands. And she knew, with the quiet certainty of someone who finds the missing piece of an incomplete puzzle, that the history of this house wasn't only Miss Genevieve's story. It was a love story that had repeated itself. Perhaps more than once. Perhaps across generations. And now, for reasons Violet didn't yet fully understand, it was her turn to decide whether the pattern repeated or broke. Outside, the Savannah sun was sinking behind the live oaks of Forsyth Park, and the long afternoon shadows invaded the garden like fingers searching for something lost. Violet slipped the photograph into the pocket of her shirt, close to her heart, and locked the library door. Tomorrow Sloane would return. Tomorrow they would keep working. Tomorrow they would keep pretending this was just an estate, just a legal process, just two professionals doing their job. But old Savannah houses know something that people take longer to learn, that secrets don't stay buried forever. They stay buried until the right people arrive to unearth them, and Violet and Sloane had arrived. 5 days passed. 5 mornings where Sloane arrived at 9 with coffee and biscuits from the bakery. 5 afternoons where she left at 2 without saying anything that wasn't strictly necessary. And between 9 and 2, a contained world, a conversation happening beneath the words, in the gestures, in the silences, in the way their bodies moved through the house like two planets orbiting too close but refusing to collide. Violet worked on the mural. She had called a fellow restorer from Savannah, a man named Henry, who ran a workshop near the SCAD campus, and who arrived on the 3rd day with a pickup truck full of brushes, spatulas, solvents, and a folding ladder that barely fit through the garden gate. Henry was heavyset, bald, with enormous hands and an easy laugh. and when he saw the wall of the rear garden, he whistled as though he had found gold. "This isn't just any mural, Violet," he said while touching the surface with his fingertips. "Look at the brushwork. Look at the pigments. This is true fresco technique, the real deal. Whoever did this studied with someone serious. Or was someone serious." "Can you identify the period?" Violet asked. "At a glance, I'd say late 60s, early 70s. But you'd need a proper materials analysis to confirm." Henry leaned closer to the wall and squinted. "What intrigues me is why they covered it up. Work like this doesn't get hidden by accident. Someone decided this mural shouldn't be seen." Violet thought about the photograph, about the two women smiling in front of the same wall with the complete mural at their backs. 1971. Before fear won. Someone had covered the mural after that date, probably years later, with a coat of whitewash and then letting the ivy do the rest. A slow, silent burial. Henry left her the tools, wished her luck, and drove off, promising to return when she needed a second opinion. Violet started the work that same afternoon, alone, with the Savannah sun on her back and the sound of birds in the fig tree as her only company. Restoring a mural is nothing like restoring a painting. A painting can be taken to a studio, placed under controlled lighting, worked on inch by inch with precision instruments. A mural is bound to its wall. It is part of the house. It breathes with it. It deteriorates with it. And restoring it means entering a conversation with the building, understanding its moisture, its cracks, its scars. Violet knew this, and as she worked, spatula in one hand and damp cloth in the other, removing layer after layer of hardened whitewash, she felt she was not only uncovering paint, she was uncovering something that someone had wanted to bury with the same determination used to bury a family secret. By the fourth day of work, the uncovered fragment was considerable. The two intertwined hands they had initially discovered were part of a larger composition. Two full-length female figures, standing face to face, their hands joined at the center. One of them looked upward, toward a sky painted in cobalt blue with clouds that seemed to move. The other looked directly at the viewer, as if daring them to look away. The colors were extraordinary, even beneath the layers of grime and deterioration. Earthy reds, yellow ochres, greens as deep as a forest. And that blue that reminded Violet of the stained glass in old southern churches, where color seems to carry its own weight. Sloane observed the progress each morning. She didn't say much. She would stand in the doorway of the rear garden with her coffee in hand and study the mural, as though reading a particularly complex legal brief. Violet would watch her from the corner of her eye and notice how Sloane's gaze followed each uncovered line, each revealed color, with an attention that wasn't professional. It was personal. It was a Thursday when Sloane broke the routine. Violet was on the ladder, working on the upper section of the mural, where the whitewash was thickest and most resistant. She wore a paint-stained old t-shirt, a bandana tied over her hair, and latex gloves for handling the solvents. She was sweating. December heat in Savannah is deceptive. The sun hits hard at midday even though the mornings are cool, and the rear garden had no shade. Sloane appeared in the doorway, but not in her blazer. She wore dark jeans, a white cotton blouse, and flat shoes. Hair loose, no briefcase, no tablet. Violet saw her from above and felt something shift in her chest, something like vertigo but warmer. "Not working today?" she asked from the ladder, trying to keep her voice casual. "It's my day off," Sloane replied. "But I came anyway. I want to help with the mural." "I don't need help." "I didn't ask if you needed it. I said I want to help." Violet climbed down the ladder. She stood facing Sloane, spatula in hand and a streak of white paint on her left cheek. "Do you know what you're asking?" Violet said, and she wasn't talking only about the mural. "This is delicate work. If you apply pressure in the wrong spot, You can damage the original paint layer. Then teach me, Sloane replied, and the way she said it, with a blend of firmness and softness that Violet hadn't heard in 11 years, made the restorer's defenses crack like the whitewash she'd been stripping from the wall. She taught her. She showed her how to hold the spatula at an angle to avoid scratching the paint, how to dampen the cloth without soaking it, how to work from the outside in, following the lines of the composition. Sloane learned quickly. She had intelligent hands, precise, accustomed to detail from years of reviewing contracts in fine print. And as they worked together, shoulder to shoulder, with dirty hands and the sun falling on them, something happened that neither had planned. They began to talk. Not about the important things. Not yet. They started from the edges, the way you restore a mural, from the outside in. Are you still living near Forsyth Park? Violet asked without looking at her, focused on a fragment of blue. Moved years ago. I'm in a townhouse on Jones Street now, close to the firm. Small place in a building from the 40s. Original hardwood floors. Balcony with flower boxes. Nothing special, Sloane replied while removing whitewash with a patience that surprised Violet. And you? Asheville? Asheville, Violet confirmed. I have a shared studio in the River Arts District. It's a quiet neighborhood. I like it. You always liked quiet? Always. Violet paused. And your mother? Still in Charleston? The silence that followed was different from the ones before. It wasn't a professional silence or an uncomfortable one. It was a silence that contained grief. She passed 4 years ago, Sloane said quietly. It was fast. At least that's what the doctors said. That it was fast. It didn't feel that way to me. I'm so sorry, Violet said, and she meant it. She had met Mrs. Beaumont, Sloane's mother. She had seen her once, at a family dinner where Sloane introduced her as a friend from college. Mrs. Beaumont was a small, smiling woman who made peach cobbler like no one else and kissed her daughter's forehead every time she saw her, even though Sloane was already an adult. And who one evening, without knowing Violet was listening from the hallway, told Sloane, "Baby, I don't understand those modern things, but you're my daughter, and I love my daughter no matter what." Violet never forgot that sentence, not because it was perfect, but because it was real. Mrs. Beaumont didn't understand, but she loved. And sometimes, loving without understanding is braver than understanding without loving. Did you ever tell her? Violet asked, and she knew she was crossing a line. Your mother. Did you tell her who you were? Sloane stopped working. She stood with the damp cloth in her hand, looking at a fragment of the mural where red met ochre in a smooth transition that looked like a sunset. Yes, she said at last. 3 months before she died. In the hospital. I told her everything. I told her I had loved a woman. That I probably always would. That I was sorry for not having said it sooner. And what did she say? Sloane smiled. Not a big or happy smile. A small, fragile smile, like a flower growing through a crack in the concrete. She said, "Oh, sweetheart, I already knew that, but thank you for telling me yourself." Violet felt her eyes sting. She blinked rapidly and turned back to the mural. She scraped a fragment of whitewash harder than necessary. Sloane said nothing more. And in that shared silence, with dirty hands and the sun on their backs, something shifted between them. No barrier broke. There was no dramatic moment. Just a millimeter of distance that closed, a degree of temperature that rose, a layer of protection that thinned like the whitewash beneath the spatula. They kept working until 4 in the afternoon, 2 hours longer than usual. Sloane didn't mention the schedule. Violet didn't mention that she had noticed. When they finished, they had uncovered half the mural. The two female figures were now clearly visible from the waist up. One of them was holding something in her free hand, something still covered by whitewash that Violet hadn't been able to reveal without risking damage to the paint. "What do you think she's holding?" Sloane asked, as they washed their hands at the garden stone utility sink. "I don't know. I need a gentler solvent for that area. The paint is more fragile there," Violet replied, drying her hands on a clean rag. "Could be an object, a flower, a book, anything." "Or a letter," Sloane said. Violet looked at her. Sloane held her gaze. "Why a letter?" Violet asked. "Because Genevieve kept letters. Lots of letters, not just mine." It was the first time Sloane had mentioned the letters directly, and in doing so, she confirmed what Violet already knew. That Sloane was aware Violet had found them. She hadn't said so before. She hadn't asked. She had waited, with the patience of an attorney who knows the best strategy is sometimes to let the other party reveal their hand first. "I found them," Violet said. "Your letters, the first day." "I know," Sloane replied. "I knew when I asked if you'd found anything else in the boxes and you answered with an evasion. You're not a good liar, Violet. You never were." "Are you angry?" "Angry?" Sloane tilted her head, as though the question genuinely confused her. "No, I'm not angry. I'm tired. Tired of pretending there isn't an elephant the size of this house sitting between us every time we're in the same room." Violet leaned against the utility sink. Cold water dripped from her hands. "I'm tired too," she admitted. "Then maybe we should stop pretending." "And do what?" Sloane looked at her with those dark eyes that seemed to contain more than a single life could generate. "Tell the truth, starting with you. Why did you leave, Violet? 11 years ago, that night, without saying anything. Why?" The question landed like a stone in a still pond. The ripples spread outward. The sound of water dripping in the sink amplified. A plane passed high above Savannah, leaving a white line across the sky that slowly dissolved. Violet opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. "Because I thought I was hurting you," she said at last, and her voice sounded broken, like an object that's been glued but whose cracks are still visible. "I thought that if I stayed, I was going to ruin your life, your career, your relationship with your family. I thought what I felt for you was something that would destroy you. And it didn't occur to you to ask me whether I wanted to be destroyed?" Sloane replied, and there was no rage in her voice, only a sadness so deep that Violet felt it crack her ribs. "No, it didn't. Because I was 23 and I was terrified, and because my own mother had told me, 2 weeks before, that what I was, not what I did, what I was a disgrace to the family. And I believed her, Sloane. I believed her." Sloane closed her eyes. When she opened them, they were damp but steady. "Your mother was wrong," she said with the most serious voice Violet had ever heard from her. "And you made a mistake believing her, but the biggest mistake wasn't leaving. It was not telling me why. I know. 11 years, Violet. I know. 11 years believing there was something wrong with me, that I was the reason you left, that I had pushed you or scared you, or that I simply wasn't enough." "You were more than enough," Violet's voice cracked. "You were everything, and that's exactly what terrified me." The rear garden fell silent. The wisteria from the side garden dropped purple petals that the wind carried to where they stood. The half-uncovered mural watched them from the wall, with its two incomplete female figures, one looking at the sky and the other looking straight ahead, hands joined, and a mysterious object in one of their hands. Sloane was the first to move. She took a step back, ran her hands through her hair, breathed deeply. "We can't resolve 11 years in one afternoon," she said, and her voice had recovered some of its usual firmness, though not all. "And we have work to do here." But I needed to hear that. And I needed you to know that I carried guilt too. Guilt for not searching for you, for giving up too soon. "It wasn't your fault," Violet said. "Nor yours," Sloane replied. "Or maybe it was both of ours. It doesn't matter. What matters is what we do now." Violet nodded. She didn't know exactly what we do now meant, but for the first time in 11 years, she felt the weight in her chest shift. It didn't disappear, but it redistributed, as though someone had helped her carry a suitcase she'd been hauling alone for too long. Sloane gathered her things. At the front door, she paused as always, but this time she did turn around. "Tomorrow I'll bring sandwiches from that deli on Liberty Street." They opened a new location. "Do you still eat turkey and Swiss?" Violet blinked. Of everything that had happened that afternoon, of all the truths spoken and silences broken, that question was the one that completely disarmed her. Because it meant Sloane remembered. Not just the big moments, the dramatic ones. She remembered the small ones. The sandwiches they used to share on a bench in Forsyth Park on Sunday afternoons. The way Violet always ordered turkey and Swiss, and Sloane teased her about her lack of culinary imagination. "I do," Violet said with a smile that escaped without permission. "Predictable," Sloane said, and the shadow of a smile crossed her face before she disappeared through the front door. Violet closed the door and stood with her back against the old wood, looking at the Savannah sky beginning to turn orange through the sidelight windows. She felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. It wasn't happiness. It was something subtler and more dangerous. It was the sensation of being exactly where she was supposed to be, doing exactly what she was supposed to do, with the right person about to return tomorrow. And that terrified her. But this time, she decided, the terror was not going to win. The third week of work brought 2 discoveries that changed everything. The first was accidental. Violet was reorganizing the boxes in the study when she found, at the bottom of a box she had overlooked, a hardcover notebook in dark green. It wasn't a diary, it was a registry. On each page, Miss Genevieve had recorded, in her tight, meticulous handwriting, dates, names, and brief descriptions of objects she had stored in the house over the years. It was a personal inventory, not a legal one, but extraordinarily detailed. Violet flipped through it quickly at first, searching for references to the mural. She found them on page 43. The entry was dated 1971 and read, "Rosemary finished the mural today. She says it's her best work. She says it's us. I told her she was crazy. She kissed me and said craziness was the only thing keeping us alive." Violet read the entry 3 times. Rosemary. The R from the photograph. Rosemary had painted the mural. And Rosemary and Genevieve were not friends. They were lovers. She kept flipping. The entries became more sporadic after 1975. There was a gap of several years. Then, in 1982, an entry written in a shaky hand. "Rosemary is gone. Her family sent her to live with relatives in Birmingham. They say it's to set her straight. There is no setting straight what we are. I covered the mural with whitewash. I couldn't look at it every day and keep breathing." Violet closed the notebook. Her hands were trembling. She sat in the study chair, the notebook on her knees, while the weight of what she had just read settled like dust after a collapse. Miss Genevieve had lived the same story. She had loved a woman. She had been separated from her. And she had spent the rest of her life in this house,
keeping the secret the way you keep a fragile object, with excessive care, with constant fear, with a tenderness no one else could see. And then Violet understood why Genevieve had received Sloane's letters with such openness, why she had taken her in, why she had never said a word to the family. Genevieve recognized in Sloane what she herself had lived, and in Violet, the cowardice she too had felt when she let Rosemary go without fighting. The second discovery was the one that connected everything. Violet searched for Rosemary's surname in the notebook. She found it in an entry from 1969, the first mention. Rosemary Beaumont, moved to the neighborhood this summer, paints as if color pours from her hands. Beaumont. Sloane's last name was Beaumont. Violet felt the floor shift beneath her, though she knew it was perfectly still. She grabbed her phone. She searched online for what she could. She didn't find much about Rosemary Beaumont, but she found a public birth record in Alabama mentioning a Rosemary Louise Beaumont, born in 1948 in Birmingham. There was no way to confirm she was the same person without more research, but the coincidence was too great to ignore. If Rosemary Beaumont was related to Sloane, if she was her great aunt, then the story of this house didn't only repeat itself, it intersected. The families of Violet and Sloane were connected by a previous love, a love that had also been silenced, separated, buried beneath layers of whitewash and shame. Violet spent the rest of the afternoon reading Genevieve's notebook. Not all the entries were about Rosemary. Many were about the daily life of a woman alone in a large house in Savannah's historic district. Roof repairs, the adoption of a cat named Austin who lived 18 years, visits from neighbors, the Christmases when Genevieve always placed a secret ornament on the tree, unnamed and unexplained, that no one understood but that she maintained year after year. There was an entry from 2014 that caught her attention. Today I met Sloane Beaumont. She came recommended by a lawyer friend. She's young, brilliant, with the eyes of someone who has cried more than she should at her age. When I asked her full name and she said Beaumont, I felt the house tremble. But houses don't tremble. What trembles is an old woman who recognizes the surname of the woman she loved on the lips of a stranger. Violet closed the notebook for good. She needed to talk to Sloane. She needed to tell her what she'd found. But she also needed to prepare for what it meant, that their stories were connected not just by what they had lived together, but by something older, deeper, something from before them that had reached them without their knowing. When Sloane arrived the next day, Violet was waiting in the side garden, sitting on the edge of the dry bird bath, with the green notebook in her hands. I need you to read something, Violet said before Sloane could even set her bag down. Sloane frowned. She set her bag on the garden bench. She sat beside Violet, not across from her, but next to her, on the edge of the bird bath, their legs almost touching. Violet opened the notebook to page 43 and handed it over. Sloane read in silence. Violet watched her read. She saw her expression change gradually, like a sky clouding over. The initial curiosity, the surprise, the slow comprehension, and then something Violet didn't expect. Recognition. As though Sloane was reading something she had already suspected, but never had the words to articulate. When she reached the name Rosemary Beaumont, Sloane stopped reading. She raised her eyes from the notebook and looked at Violet with an expression that held too many emotions for a single face. Rosemary, she repeated quietly. Rosemary Beaumont. Do you know her? Violet asked. Sloane closed her eyes, opened them. Rosemary was my grandfather's older sister. In the family, they called her the aunt who went to Birmingham. Nobody talked about her. When I was a little girl and asked, my grandmother would say Rosemary had problems, and the family sent her to live with some church people. I thought she meant money problems or health issues. I never asked more. Nobody let me ask more. Sloane. Wait. Sloane raised a hand. Let me finish. My grandfather died when I was 12. At his funeral, an older woman I didn't know approached my father and whispered something in his ear. My father went pale. He told the woman to leave. I never knew who she was or what she said. But now, she looked at the notebook. Now I think that woman might have been Rosemary, or someone who knew her. Did your father know? My father knew something. I don't know how much. He passed 7 years ago. We never talked about Rosemary. We never talked about anything important, really. Violet took the notebook from Sloane's hands. She closed it carefully. There's more, she said. Genevieve wrote about you, about when she met you. She knew your surname. She knew who you were. She knew I was Rosemary's family. From the very first moment. Sloane stood up. She walked to the center of the garden. She stood among the cracked pots and unruly wisteria, hands on her hips and head tilted slightly back, looking at the sky as though searching for an answer in the clouds. Genevieve took me in because she saw Rosemary in me, she said at last, and it wasn't a question. She listened to me, cared for me, gave me shelter, because she was mending what she couldn't mend with Rosemary. I think so, Violet said. I think for her, helping you was a form of redemption, of doing for you what no one did for them. Sloane turned to face her. Her eyes were bright, but she wasn't crying. Sloane wasn't the type to cry easily. She was the type to process, analyze, understand, and then, much later, in private, allow herself to feel. And us? Sloane asked in a voice that was almost a whisper. What are we in this story? The repetition? The second chance? I don't know, Violet said honestly. But I think Genevieve wanted us to figure it out. Sloane let out a brief laugh, humorless, more like a sigh that escaped through the wrong exit. A lawyer and a restorer untangling a will that's really an intergenerational love letter. Sounds like something Genevieve would have enjoyed very much. Violet smiled despite everything. Do you want to see what the mural has revealed so far? Rosemary's work. Sloane nodded. They went together to the rear garden. The mural was now roughly 70% visible. The two female figures were beautiful in their simplicity, not idealized or stylized. They were two real women, with real bodies, with expressions that captured the exact moment when two people look at each other and know, without needing words, that what exists between them is bigger than anything the outside world can say. Sloane stepped closer to the mural. She extended her hand and touched the surface with her fingertips, right where the two figures' hands joined. It's beautiful, she murmured. It is, Violet said. And look, here's something I haven't been able to fully uncover yet. The figure on the right has something in her free hand. I think I can reveal it tomorrow. Can I be here when you do? Yes, you can be here. If any part of this story feels like your life, the hype button helps make sure it doesn't go unheard. That afternoon, after Sloane left, Violet returned to the study and reread Sloane's letters to Genevieve with new eyes. She no longer read them as an intruder discovering someone else's intimacy. She read them as someone beginning to understand her place in a story larger than herself. In one of the letters, dated 2018, Sloane had written, Dear Genevieve, today I was promoted at the firm. I should be happy. But the first thing I thought when they gave me the news was, who do I tell? And the answer was your name. Not my mother's, not my friend's, yours. Because you are the only person in my life who knows exactly who I am, without me having to edit myself. Violet closed her eyes. without me having to edit myself. That phrase pierced something, because she, Violet, had done exactly that for years. Edited herself. Trimmed the parts that didn't fit. Pruned the desires that stuck out. Presented the world with a polished, safe version of herself that didn't threaten anyone, didn't make anyone uncomfortable, didn't ask awkward questions. And in that editing process, she had erased the most important thing: her ability to love without fear. The next morning, Saturday, Violet woke early. She didn't expect Sloane, since they had agreed to work only Monday through Thursday. But she needed to keep progressing on the mural. She put on old clothes, prepared her tools, and went to the rear garden with the first light of day. The remaining fragment was the most delicate. The paint in that area was more damaged, probably from moisture seeping from the corner of the wall where the garden spigot had dripped for years. Violet worked with a fine brush and a gentle solvent, removing the whitewash millimeter by millimeter, with the patience only a restorer can possess. By 11 in the morning, the object in the figure's hand was revealed. It wasn't a flower. It wasn't a book. It wasn't a letter. It was a key. A small key, painted with extraordinary detail, golden-colored with a blue ribbon tied to its handle. The figure in the mural held it with open fingers, as if offering it, as if saying, "Take it. This is yours." Violet stepped down from the ladder and studied the painted key from different angles. It was too specific to be a generic symbol. Rosemary had painted a real key. A key that existed. Or had existed. She pulled out her phone and took several photos of the complete mural and the key detail. Then she went to the study, opened Genevieve's notebook, and searched for any reference to a key. She found it in an entry from 1972. "Rosemary gave me a key today. She says it's to a place she bought for us. A place where nobody knows us, and where we can be what we are without apologizing. I don't believe her, but I'm keeping the key in the blue chest just in case." The blue chest. Violet searched the house for a blue chest. She checked closets, drawers, shelves, cupboards. Nothing. Then she remembered there was one room they still hadn't opened. The third locked room, the one at the end of the left hallway, beside a door leading to the back porch. Sloane had the key. Violet grabbed her phone and dialed Sloane's number before thinking twice. Sloane answered on the second ring. "Violet, is everything all right?" Her voice sounded different on the phone. Softer, less guarded. "Yes. I need you to come to the house. Today. I found something in the mural." "What did you find?" "A key. But not the one in the mural. I mean, yes, there's a key painted in the mural. But Genevieve wrote about a real key. Kept in a blue chest. And I think that chest is in the room we haven't opened." There was a pause. "I'm on my way," Sloane said. "Give me 40 minutes." She arrived in 35. Hair still damp, as though she had just stepped out of the shower. Wearing jeans and a faded UGA sweatshirt. No makeup, house keys in hand. They stood before the third locked door. Sloane found the right key on the ring and inserted it into the lock. It turned with the resistance of a mechanism that hadn't been moved in years. The door opened. The room was small, smaller than the others. It appeared to have been a sewing room or craft space. There was an antique Singer sewing machine covered with a fabric drape, a shelf with boxes of thread and fabric, and in the corner, on a low wooden cabinet, a chest. Blue. Metal, with tarnished gold edges and a clasp that had no padlock. It was the size of a shoebox, and when Violet touched it, it was heavier than she expected. They carried it to the dining room, set it on the table, sat down side by side. Violet looked at Sloane. "Together?" she asked. Sloane nodded. Violet opened the chest. Inside were several things. A handkerchief embroidered with the intertwined initials G and R. Another photograph, this time in color, of Genevieve and Rosemary at what appeared to be the beach, possibly Tybee Island, with the ocean behind them and expressions of happiness so pure they hurt to look at. A simple silver ring, a folded sheet of paper, and at the bottom, wrapped in a piece of purple velvet, a small key with a blue ribbon tied to its handle, identical to the one in the mural. Sloane picked up the beach photograph and studied it in silence. Violet unfolded the sheet of paper. It was a handwritten note, in Genevieve's handwriting, addressed to no one in particular, or perhaps to whoever found it. If you're reading this, the house has served its purpose. This key opens a place in Savannah, 12 Abercorn Lane, Unit 3. Rosemary bought it in 1972 with the money she earned selling her paintings. We never got to use it the way we wanted, but it's paid for and it's in both our names. If Rosemary is gone, it belongs to whoever carries her blood. And if I am gone, it belongs to whoever carries my memory. This key doesn't open a door. It opens a promise we couldn't keep. Let's keep it for them. Violet finished reading aloud. Her own voice sounded distant, as if coming from another room. Sloane said nothing for a long while. She held the beach photograph with both hands, and Violet saw that her fingers were trembling slightly. Abercorn Lane, Sloane said at last. It's a 10-minute walk from here, a small street near the Savannah River. Do you want to go? No, Sloane said. Not yet. First, I need to understand something. Why didn't Genevieve tell Rosemary about me? Why didn't she tell either family they were connected? I think she did, Violet said slowly, thinking aloud. In her own way, the will, the conditions, placing both of us in this house at the same time. It was her way of telling us without telling us, of giving us the chance to discover it ourselves. Like a legal case where evidence is presented in order, Sloane said with an involuntary half-smile. First the context, then the facts, then the conclusion. And we are the conclusion. Sloane looked at her, and this time she didn't look away. She didn't raise a professional barrier. She didn't change the subject. She stayed there, looking at Violet with an honesty so raw it seemed as though she had stripped away her skin and was showing what lay underneath. I don't want to be a repetition, Sloane said. I don't want to live the same story as Genevieve and Rosemary. I don't want to hide what I feel in a chest and wait 50 years for someone to find it. Neither do I, Violet said. Then we need to be braver than they were. Braver than we were 11 years ago. Yes, can you do that? Violet didn't answer immediately, not because she didn't want to, but because the question deserved an honest answer, not a quick one. I don't know, she said at last. But I want to try, and that's already more than I could have said 11 years ago. Sloane nodded. She placed the photograph back in the chest. She took the key with the blue ribbon and held it in the palm of her hand, studying it as though it were a riddle she was about to solve. Tomorrow, she said. Tomorrow we go to Abercorn Lane, and we see what Genevieve and Rosemary wanted us to find. Tomorrow, Violet repeated. Sloane left that afternoon with the key in the pocket of her sweatshirt. Violet watched her walk down the sidewalk beneath the live oaks, with her still damp hair shining in the afternoon sun, and thought there was something cruel and beautiful about the way life returns you to the places where you first started losing yourself. Savannah had received her with dust, old letters, and a buried mural, and now it was offering her something she didn't dare name yet, but that she felt growing inside her like the wisteria that climbed without permission along the walls of the house. Somewhere in that sprawling, indifferent city, Sloane was walking with a key in her pocket and a question in her head.
And Violet stayed behind in Miss Genevieve's house, surrounded by ghosts that weren't ghosts but memories, preparing herself for what would come tomorrow. What would come tomorrow could change everything. Or it could confirm what both of them already knew, but didn't dare say aloud. That what they called guilt, what they called a mistake, what they called fear, had always been something else. It had always been love. And love, when it has been locked away too long, doesn't weaken. It concentrates. It becomes denser, heavier, more impossible to ignore. Like a mural beneath layers of whitewash. Like a key inside a blue chest. Like two women who find each other after 11 years and discover that what they felt isn't only still there, but has grown in the darkness like a root searching for water. Night fell over Savannah with its usual weight of invisible stars and distant noise. Violet locked the house, checked the bolts, turned off the lights. She lay down on the single bed in the room with the bay window and listened to the nighttime sounds, the pipes, the branches, the neighbor's cat. But tonight she added a new sound to her catalog, the echo of Sloane's voice saying, "We need to be braver than they were." And with that echo bouncing off the walls of her mind, she closed her eyes and allowed herself, for the first time in 11 years, to fall asleep without guilt. Sunday dawned overcast in Savannah, with that pewter sky the city wears when it wants to remind its people that beauty and melancholy are sisters. Violet woke before dawn, eyes snapping open and heart hammering, as though her body knew before her mind that this day would be different from everyone that came before. She made coffee in Miss Genevieve's kitchen with its cracked tiles. The coffee was strong and bitter, brewed in a dented percolator she had found in the cupboard that probably had more years on it than she did. While she waited for it to brew, she looked through the kitchen window toward the side garden. The wisteria looked gray in the overcast light, as though someone had drained their color. A hummingbird darted across the garden with that absurd speed hummingbirds have, and vanished over the wall before Violet could follow it with her eyes. At 10 in the morning, Sloane knocked on the front door. 3 knocks, but softer than usual, as if her hand was also nervous. Violet opened. Sloane wore a denim jacket over a dark blouse, jeans and white sneakers, hair pulled back in a low ponytail. In her right hand, the key with the blue ribbon. In her left, nothing. Sloane's hands were empty for the first time since she had started coming to the house. No briefcase, no coffee, no shield of everyday objects. "Ready?" Sloane asked. "No," Violet answered honestly. "But let's go." They walked together along the oak-lined streets heading north toward the river, passing the historic homes that stood on either side like silent witnesses to 3 centuries of stories. The cobblestones were damp from an early morning drizzle that had left small puddles reflecting the leaden sky. They passed the Cathedral of St. John the Baptist, with its twin spires and its iron gate where a groundskeeper swept fallen leaves. They passed a bookshop where a woman was arranging a window display of local history titles. They passed a flower stand where an old man stacked mason jars of fresh-cut hydrangeas with a geometric precision that Violet found to be a form of art in itself. They didn't talk during the walk. Not because they had nothing to say, but because what they were about to do required a preparatory kind of silence, like the one that precedes the first chord of a symphony or the first brushstroke on a blank canvas. Abercorn Lane was exactly as Sloane had described it. Small, narrow, cobblestoned, with magnolia trees that formed a green canopy over the street, and low-slung buildings with faded pastel facades. It was one of those Savannah streets tourists don't visit, because it doesn't appear in the guidebooks, but that locals know like the backs of their own hands. Number 12 was a 2-story building, its facade a pale yellow with green shutters on the windows. It had a wooden door smaller than the one at Genevieve's house, with a brass mailbox set into the wall and a doorbell that no longer had a button. Unit 3 was on the ground floor, at the end of a narrow hallway that smelled of damp plaster and fresh paint, probably from a recent renovation in a neighboring apartment. The door was dark wood, with an old but solid lock. Sloane looked at Violet. Violet looked at the key. "You or me?" Violet asked. "Both of us," Sloane said. Sloane inserted the key. It turned with difficulty, as though the mechanism was rusted but not broken. A click, then another. The door opened with a long, deep creak, like a sigh someone had been holding for decades. The apartment was small, a living room that doubled as a dining area, with a window overlooking an interior courtyard where a lemon tree grew. A tiny kitchen with white tiles and a 2-burner stove covered by a plastic sheet. A bathroom with a shower and an oval mirror framed in wood. And a bedroom with a double bed covered by a handmade cotton quilt, embroidered with red and blue flowers, clean, as though someone had washed it recently. Violet entered first. The floor was original mosaic tile, with a geometric pattern in shades of blue and terracotta that she recognized as a 1960s design. The walls were painted white, without paintings, without decoration, except for one detail that stopped her dead. On the living room wall, facing the lemon tree window, hung a small painting. An oil on canvas, framed in simple wood. It was a landscape. Not just any landscape. It was the garden of Miss Genevieve's house, painted from the perspective of someone sitting on the bird bath, looking toward the wisteria. The colors were the same as those of the mural, earthy reds, cobalt blues, forest greens. The signature in the lower right corner read, R. Beaumont, 1973. Sloane entered behind her, saw the painting, approached it slowly, like someone approaching a wounded animal, careful not to frighten it. "She painted Genevieve's garden," Sloane said softly. "From here, from this apartment. She painted from memory the place where they were happy." Violet nodded, unable to speak. She had a lump in her throat the size of a fist. She looked at the painting with a restorer's eyes and saw the quality of the work, the sensitivity of the brushstroke, the emotion contained in every mark. Rosemary Beaumont hadn't been a hobbyist. She had been a real artist, whose work had been buried by the same shame that buried her love. They walked through the apartment in silence. The kitchen had plates in the drying rack, silverware in a drawer, a clay teapot. The bathroom had towels folded on a shelf. Everything was clean, orderly, as though someone came regularly to maintain it. "Someone's been taking care of this place," Violet said. "Genevieve," Sloane replied. "I'd bet anything Genevieve came here, to clean, to keep it alive, like a promise that didn't break even though it couldn't be fulfilled." In the bedroom, Violet opened the nightstand drawer. Inside was an envelope. She pulled it out. It was sealed, with the name Sloane written on the front, in Genevieve's handwriting. "It's for you," Violet said, handing her the envelope. Sloane took it. She sat on the bed. Violet stayed standing in the doorframe, giving her space. Sloane opened the envelope carefully, pulled out a sheet, folded in thirds, and read in silence. Violet watched Sloane's face change as she read. She saw surprise. She saw comprehension. She saw something that might have been relief or pain, or a mixture of both that has no name. And at the end, she saw something she had never seen in Sloane, not even during the 3 months they had shared 11 years ago. She saw tears. Not many. 2. 3. Sloane let them fall without wiping them. Then she folded the letter, put it back in the envelope, and looked up at Violet. "Come here," she said. "You need to read this." Violet sat beside her on the bed. Their shoulders touched. Sloane handed her the letter. Violet unfolded it and read. "Sloane, if you're reading this, the house has done its work. You found Violet, or she found you. It doesn't matter who found whom. What matters is that you are together, right now, in this place that Rosemary and I were never able to share as a home. I'm not writing to give you advice. At my age, advice is just regret dressed up as wisdom. I'm writing to tell you one thing. What you felt for Violet was not guilt. What Violet felt for you was not a mistake. What separated you wasn't what you were, but the fear of a world that wasn't ready to understand you. Rosemary and I lived with that fear our whole lives. We loved each other in secret, in this apartment that smelled of turpentine and hope. And when they separated us, I was left with the silence, and she took the colors. I regret many things, but what I regret most is not fighting, accepting that the world got to decide for us. Don't make our mistake. The world has changed. It isn't perfect, but it is bigger than it was in 1975. There is room for you. Take it. Take each other. And if you're afraid, remember that fear is not the opposite of love. The opposite of love is resignation. I leave you this house because it was ours. And I leave you the other because it was your refuge. Use them. Live in them. Fill their walls with what Rosemary and I couldn't hang in plain sight. A life shared without apology. With all the love that fits in this old, tired body, Genevieve. Violet finished reading. The paper trembled in her hands. She set it on the bed, between them, like a paper bridge over a river of 11 years. Genevieve planned everything, Violet said, her voice barely a thread. The will, the conditions, the inventory, the key. Everything was so we'd end up here. Not just here, Sloane said. Here, together. They looked at each other. They were sitting on the bed of an apartment two women had purchased over 50 years ago, as a refuge for a love the world wouldn't allow. The gray daylight came through the window and gave the room the look of a vintage photograph. Soft, slightly unfocused, as if time itself were yielding so this moment could exist. I'm scared, Violet said. So am I, Sloane said. But I don't want fear to decide for me. Not again. Neither do I. Violet extended her hand. She left it open on the embroidered quilt, palm facing up, like the figure in the mural offering the key. An invitation. No pressure. No urgency. Just an open hand waiting. Sloane looked at her. Looked at the hand. Looked at Violet again. And then, with the deliberation of someone making a decision they've mentally rehearsed for 11 years, she placed her hand on Violet's. The contact was electric and silent at the same time. It wasn't a squeeze. It was a recognition. Two hands finding each other after too long apart and discovering with wonder and with ache that they still fit. They stayed like that for a while. Sitting on the bed, hands joined, not speaking, listening to the sounds of the old building. A neighbor singing upstairs, a faucet dripping in the bathroom, the wind moving the lemon tree branches against the window. And in that silence, something reconfigured between them. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't reconciliation. It was something humbler and braver. It was a beginning. I don't know how to do this, Violet said at last, without letting go of Sloane's hand. I don't know how to start over with someone I left in the worst possible way. We're not starting over, Sloane replied, and her voice had a steadiness that was also a shelter. We're continuing from where we left off. But better, with what we know now. And what do we know now? Sloane squeezed her hand, just slightly, enough for Violet to feel she wasn't alone. We know that the guilt we carried wasn't guilt. It was love mixed with fear. And we know we can choose to keep the love and release the fear. Not all at once. Not today. But a little bit each day. Violet nodded, and then she did something she hadn't done in 11 years. She allowed herself to lean her head against Sloane's shoulder. Not as a lover, not as an ex, as someone who needs rest and has finally found where to do it. Sloane didn't move. She rested her cheek on top of Violet's head, and they stayed like that, in the apartment on Abercorn Lane, Unit 3, while outside Savannah went on with its Sunday life. Ice cream vendors in the squares, artists setting up their stands in City Market, families walking with their children and their dogs, musicians tuning their guitars for the afternoon. Everything continued. Everything moved on. And inside that small apartment, two women discovered that sometimes the most revolutionary thing you can do isn't fight the world, but sit beside someone and let your shoulder say what your words still can't. They left the apartment an hour later. Sloane locked the door with the blue ribbon key and slipped it into her jacket pocket. They walked back to Genevieve's house by a different route, passing through City Market, where the smell of fresh flowers and hot food mixed with the murmur of people haggling over prices and sampling pralines and boiled peanuts. If this doesn't deserve a comment, I don't know what does. On the corner of the market, in front of a stand selling shrimp and grits that sent up a fragrant steam, Sloane stopped. "I'm hungry," she said with a naturalness that surprised Violet. "Me too," Violet replied. They sat at the metal tables and ordered bowls of shrimp and grits, with extra pepper for Sloane, with extra butter for Violet. The woman who served them was a stout lady in a stained apron, with a smile she dispensed as generously as the hot sauce. They ate with plastic forks and paper napkins that disintegrated in the steam, and for the first time in all those weeks of working together, they talked about things that had nothing to do with the house, or the will, or the past. Sloane told her about a case she was handling at the firm, a dispute between neighbors over a tree whose roots had invaded a neighboring property. Violet told her about an altarpiece she had restored in Asheville that turned out to have a different painting beneath the visible layer, just like Genevieve's mural. "There's always something underneath," Sloane said, wiping her fingers with a fresh napkin. "Always," Violet confirmed. "The trick is knowing when to stop scraping and when to keep going." Sloane looked at her with that expression Violet was learning to recognize, the one she used when she wanted to say something important, but was still choosing the exact words. "When are you going back to Asheville?" Sloane asked. The question landed on the table like a bowl of hot grits, warm, direct, impossible to ignore. "I don't have a date," Violet replied. "The inventory isn't finished, and the mural still needs work." "And after the inventory and the mural?" "I don't know, Sloane. I really don't know." Sloane nodded. She didn't press. She paid for the food before Violet could reach for her wallet, and they walked back to the house in a silence that was no longer tense or guarded. It was a new silence, a silence that held possibility. The following 2 weeks were the strangest and most beautiful of Violet Hargrove's life. She worked on the mural in the mornings, with Sloane beside her on the days she came, and alone on the days she didn't. The mural revealed itself inch by inch, and each new fragment confirmed what they already knew. Rosemary Beaumont had been an extraordinary artist, and the mural was a declaration of love so intimate and so public at the same time that Violet could hardly believe someone had had the courage to paint it on a wall, in plain sight of anyone who entered the garden. But Rosemary hadn't calculated that the world would respond with whitewash and ivy. The completed mural showed the two full-length female figures, standing face to face, their hands joined at the center. The one on the left, looking up at the sky, had loose hair and a long blue dress that blended into the painted sky behind her. The one on the right, looking at the viewer, had her hair pinned up and wore a deep red dress that seemed to burn. In the free hand of the figure in red, the key with the blue ribbon, and at the base of the mural, in small but legible letters, a phrase Violet uncovered on the last day of restoration. "What fear buries, love unearths." Violet took a photo and texted it to Sloane.
The reply came a minute later. A key emoji and 3 dots. Nothing more. But Violet smiled reading it, because those 3 dots contained more than 1,000 words. They contained a conversation that hadn't ended yet, a story that was still being written. The relationship between them advanced like the restoration of the mural, from the outside in, layer by layer, with patience and with care. There was no dramatic moment when everything changed. There was no grand declaration or a cinematic kiss in the rain. There was something better. There was an accumulation of small moments that, added together, weighed more than any spectacular gesture. There was the morning Sloane arrived with 2 coffees and handed one to Violet, saying, "Black, the way you like it." And Violet realized Sloane didn't just remember the turkey and Swiss sandwiches. She remembered everything. There was the afternoon they worked together in the library, cataloging Miss Genevieve's books, and Violet found a copy of Wise Blood by Flannery O'Connor, with a dedication on the first page that read, "For my Genevieve, who taught me the future isn't remembered. It's built. R." She read it to Sloane aloud, and Violet's voice broke on the last word, and Sloane reached out and touched her arm, just for a moment, just a brush, but enough for Violet to feel she wasn't alone in unearthing this story. There was the night they stayed working late, and Sloane said it was too late to walk alone to her car, and Violet offered her the second bedroom, and Sloane accepted, and stayed. And the next morning, Violet woke to the smell of fresh coffee coming from the kitchen and the certainty that waking up in a house where Sloane existed was something she could get dangerously used to. There was the afternoon it rained, that sudden, heavy rain that falls on Savannah without warning, as though someone had turned on a faucet in the sky. They took shelter in the side garden under the covered porch and watched the water pour over the wisteria and fill the stone bird bath for the first time in who knows how many years. And Sloane said, almost to herself, "Look at that. The bird bath just needed this. It just needed it to rain hard enough." And Violet knew she wasn't talking about the bird bath. And there was a night, at the end of the 3rd week, when the inventory was nearly complete and the mural fully restored, when the 2 of them were sitting in the side garden, on the edge of the bird bath, that now held rainwater where the stars were barely reflected. Violet had a glass of red wine they had bought at the wine shop on Bull Street. Sloane had another. And between them, the distance had narrowed so much their knees were touching. "Sloane," Violet said, and her voice had the tremble of someone about to jump from a high place, not because she wants to fall, but because she wants to fly. "Tell me, do you think Genevieve and Rosemary ever saw each other again?" Sloane thought a moment. "I don't know for certain, but I found something yesterday at the office. Shipping receipts from the house to an address in Birmingham, monthly. Genevieve was sending packages to someone in Birmingham for years. No recipient name, just the address. She was sending things to Rosemary," Violet said. "I think so. Books, probably. Genevieve always believed books were the best way to say what you couldn't say out loud." Violet set her wine glass on the edge of the bird bath. She turned to Sloane. The moon, or what little could be seen of it through the clouds and the city's ambient light, illuminated half her face. The other half was in shadow, like the day in the library when the round window light had split her in 2. "I don't want to send you packages in Asheville, Sloane," Violet said, and there was something in her voice that was neither desperation nor pleading. It was determination. "I don't want to write you letters for 40 years. I don't want what we have to be a beautiful secret someone finds in a box when we're both gone." "Then what do you want?" Sloane asked, and her voice was a whisper that blended with the sound of water dripping from the wisteria. "I want to be here, with you, not hidden, not as a memory, as something real." "And your life in Asheville? Your studio?" "My studio is important,"
My work is important, but I can work from here. Savannah has more restoration work than I could do in 10 lifetimes. And besides," Violet paused, took a breath. "Asheville was my refuge. Like this apartment was the refuge for Genevieve and Rosemary. But refuges are built to protect you, not to lock you in. And I locked myself in." Sloane set her glass beside Violet's. She turned to face her. They were so close that Violet could smell her perfume mixed with the scent of wine and rain-damp wisteria. It was a scent that existed nowhere else in the world. Only here. Only between them. "I'm 35 years old," Sloane said with a calm that seemed to cost her. "I have a practice that took me 7 years to build. I have a reputation in the legal community that I guard fiercely. I have a life that works, that makes sense, that lets me sleep at night." "I know," Violet said, and the fear began climbing through her chest. "And ever since I came back to this house, ever since I saw you at the front door in that dust-covered blouse with those eyes that haven't changed in 11 years, I haven't been able to sleep a single night without thinking about you." Violet stopped breathing. Not metaphorically. She literally stopped breathing for 3 seconds. "Sloane." "Don't ask me to be careful," Sloane said, and her voice cracked for the first time since they had reopened that door between them. "I've been careful my whole life. Caution protected me, but it also locked me in an office, in a routine, in a version of myself that functions but doesn't feel. I don't want to keep functioning. I want to feel. I want to feel what I felt when I was with you." "And what did you feel?" "That everything was possible. That the world was bigger than what I'd been told. That I was bigger than what I'd been allowed to be." Sloane's words hung in the garden air like the wisteria petals the wind was carrying. Violet received them one by one, the way you receive drops of rain you've been waiting for through a long drought. "I felt the same thing," Violet said. "And I was so scared that I chose to destroy it before someone else could destroy it for us. I was a coward." "You were young," Sloane corrected. "And you were alone. That's not the same as being a coward." "Do you forgive me?" The question was direct, unadorned, without rhetoric. Violet asked it looking Sloane in the eyes, with her hands open on her own knees, with all her vulnerability exposed like the mural after they removed the last layer of whitewash. Sloane didn't answer immediately, and Violet respected that pause, because she knew a forgiveness that arrives too quickly doesn't carry enough weight. "I forgive you," Sloane said at last. "Not because what you did didn't hurt. It hurt badly. I forgive you because the pain has done its job. It taught me what I don't want to repeat, and I don't want to repeat the part where I lose you." Violet extended her hand again, like in the apartment on Abercorn Lane. Palm open, no pressure. But this time, Sloane didn't just place her hand on top. She interlaced her fingers with Violet's, like the hands in the mural, like the hands Rosemary had painted 50 years ago, with the hope that someone, someday, would see them and understand that love between two women wasn't an anomaly. It was a truth as old as the walls that held it. "So what now?" Violet asked with a trembling smile. "Now we finished the inventory," Sloane replied with a seriousness that lasted exactly 2 seconds before a smile crossed her face. "And then we tell Mr. Pemberton the terms of the will have been met. And then? Then we find out what it feels like to live without hiding." Violet laughed. Not a big or boisterous laugh. A small, intimate one. The kind that only comes out when something you've been holding tight inside you finally loosens. They stayed sitting at the bird bath until the night chill drove them inside. They locked up the house together. Violet made chamomile tea in the kitchen. Sloane found a box of shortbread cookies in the bag she had brought. They sat in the parlor, on an old sofa that creaked with every movement, and talked until 2 a.m. Not about momentous things, about ordinary things, about the show Sloane was watching, about the craft market in Asheville where Violet bought her supplies, about Sloane's neighbor who had a cat named Judge, about the time Violet tried to make shrimp étouffée from scratch and ended up with the kitchen covered in roux and cayenne. These were the conversations they should have had over 11 years, and now they were having them all at once, as though trying to fill the void in one fell swoop, knowing they couldn't, but trying anyway. When the grandfather clock in the hallway struck 2, Sloane yawned. "I'm staying," she said, not as a question. "If I can." "You can," Violet replied. "The second bedroom has clean sheets." Sloane nodded. She stood, walked toward the hallway, stopped. "Violet." "Yes?" "Thank you for not leaving this time." Violet looked at her from the sofa, with the empty teacup in her hands, and her heart so full it was hard to breathe. "Thank you for coming back," she replied. Sloane disappeared down the hallway. Violet heard the door to the second bedroom open and close. She stayed on the sofa a moment longer, looking at the garden through the window, the wisteria that now, in the darkness, looked like a cascade of purple shadows. She thought about Genevieve, about Rosemary, about the mural, about the key, about the letters, about the apartment on Abercorn Lane, about everything those 2 women had built in secret, and that now, 50 years later, was coming to light like the paint beneath the whitewash. They were not going to make the same mistake. They were not going to let fear decide. They were not going to cover their story with whitewash and ivy. The morning of the last day of work arrived too soon, and not soon enough. Violet completed the full inventory of objects with artistic value. Sloane prepared the legal report for the estate attorney. The mural was restored. The blue chest was documented. The key had a clear destination. They met with Mr. Pemberton at his office on Drayton Street on a Tuesday morning. The estate attorney, a dry, meticulous man who appeared to have been born wearing a necktie, reviewed the documents with the exasperating slowness of legal proceedings in the American South. "Everything is in order," he said finally, stamping the papers with an efficiency that contrasted with the hour and a half it had taken him to reach that conclusion. "The house in the historic district remains with the Hargrove family, with Miss Violet as the designated administrator. The apartment on Abercorn Lane and the objects specified in Appendix B are transferred to Miss Beaumont. The mural, by special provision of the deceased, is placed under shared custody of both parties, with the condition that it remain visible and be maintained in good condition." "Shared custody?" Violet repeated. "That's what Miss Ashford stipulated," Pemberton said, adjusting his glasses. "And if you'll allow me a personal observation, she was a woman who knew exactly what she was doing." Violet and Sloane looked at each other across the attorney's desk. And in that look, which Pemberton probably interpreted as a professional agreement, there was something that couldn't fit in any legal document. A promise. They walked out of the law office into the midday Savannah sun, that winter sun that is bright and cool and makes you feel the world is as sharp as a high-resolution photograph. "What do we do now?" Sloane asked, standing on the sidewalk, briefcase in hand and heels clicking on the concrete. Violet looked at her, looked at the street, looked at the improbable blue December sky. "Now we go home," she said. "To our home." Sloane smiled, not the small, controlled smile of the first weeks, a complete smile without reservation that lit up her face like the round window light in the library. "Ours?" she repeated, and there was something playful in her voice that Violet hadn't heard in 11 years. "Ours," Violet confirmed. "Shared custody." The attorney said so. Sloane laughed. A real laugh, open, that made a woman passing with her grocery bags look at them with curiosity and then smile without knowing why. They took a cab back to the historic district. In the back seat, with the traffic on Abercorn Street moving with the chronic slowness of the city, Sloane rested her head on Violet's shoulder. It wasn't a dramatic gesture. It was an everyday gesture, the kind people make when they share a life, not just a moment. Violet looked out the cab window. Savannah passed like a movie. Buildings, parks, food stands, people walking with purpose and without, children in school uniforms, stray dogs sleeping on the sidewalks. And amid all that noisy, chaotic, beautiful life, Violet felt for the first time that she occupied her exact place. She wasn't running. She wasn't hiding. She wasn't restoring broken things to avoid looking at her own. She was here, with Sloane, going home. They arrived at the house as the afternoon was beginning to gild the walls of the historic homes. Violet opened the front door. Sloane stepped in behind her. The wisteria greeted them with its cascade of purple as always, and the stone bird bath still held a bit of water from the last rain. They went straight to the rear garden. They stood before the restored mural. The two figures watched them, one looking skyward, the other looking straight ahead. Hands joined, the key offered, and the phrase at the base, "What fear buries, love unearths." They did it, Sloane said softly, gazing at the mural. Genevieve and Rosemary, they couldn't live together, but they made it possible for someone else to. And that someone is us, Violet said. Yes, it's us. Violet turned toward Sloane. They stood before the mural Rosemary Beaumont had painted, in the rear garden of Miss Genevieve Ashford's house, in the historic district of Savannah, Georgia, in a country that was still learning to name what they were, but could no longer deny their existence. And Violet thought that perhaps the bravest thing a person can do isn't change the world, but change herself enough to fit in it, without trimming herself down. She took Sloane's hand, interlaced their fingers, squeezed. "Hey," Violet said. "What?" "Did you know Savannah was founded in 1733 by James Oglethorpe?" Sloane raised an eyebrow. "Yes. And what does that have to do with anything?" "Nothing," Violet said with a grin. "I just wanted to tell you a useless fact. Because that's what people do when they're with someone who matters to them. They say useless things, normal things, things that mean nothing and at the same time mean everything." Sloane looked at her, and in her eyes, those dark, intelligent eyes that had spent 11 years reading contracts and case files and office walls, Violet saw something that needed no restoration, no inventory, no legal proceeding, something that had always been there, beneath layers of protection and fear, waiting for someone with the patience to uncover it. "Violet Hargrove," Sloane said with a formality that was entirely ironic. "You're the most predictable and unpredictable person I've ever known, and I can't decide if that exasperates me or makes me fall for you all over again." "Both," Violet replied. "Always both." And there, in the rear garden of a house that smelled of wisteria and history, before a mural that had survived whitewash and neglect, two women who once lost each other found each other again. Not because destiny had brought them together, not because a wise old woman had left clues in a will. They found each other because they chose to stay, because they chose truth over comfort, vulnerability over armor, love over guilt. Genevieve had written in her letter, "The opposite of love is resignation." Violet and Sloane refused to resign themselves. And that, in the end, was enough. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't easy. There were arguments about logistics and moving and who would tell whom what. There were difficult nights when old wounds reopened and patience was needed to let them close again. There were moments when fear tried to return, like ivy that climbs if you don't prune it. But there were also mornings with coffee in the garden, afternoons restoring old objects while Sloane read in the green velvet chair in the library, long nights of conversation by the bird bath, which now held clean water and a pot of daisies Sloane had bought at City Market. There was a Christmas dinner at the apartment on Abercorn Lane, with gumbo that Violet prepared from a recipe she found in Genevieve's notebook, and cornbread that Sloane ordered from a woman in Charleston who shipped it overnight. They set the small table beside the lemon tree window and ate with the door open to the courtyard, and toasted with bourbon that Violet had brought in her suitcase from Asheville. And at some point during that Christmas evening, when the whole city was lighting luminaries on the squares and the bells of the Cathedral of St. John the Baptist were ringing as though trying to wake the centuries sleeping beneath its foundations, Sloane took Violet's hand across the table and said, "Merry Christmas, Violet. Thank you for staying." And Violet replied, "Merry Christmas, Sloane. Thank you for letting me." And so, in a house with peeling cream clapboard and purple wisteria in Savannah's historic district, in a small apartment with a lemon tree in the courtyard, and a painting by a woman who loved in silence, two women began the life that Genevieve and Rosemary had dreamed of, but could not have. Not as a repetition, as a continuation, as the second act of a story whose first act couldn't find its ending. Because sometimes, what we call guilt is just love waiting for courage. And sometimes the courage arrives late, but it arrives. If you want the continuation of this story, write it in the comments, because that's the only way I'll know you want more. And remember, YouTube prioritizes subscribers. Subscribe now so you don't miss the next story that will make you believe love has no shape, no gender, and no expiration date. This is only the beginning. See you soon.